referred to as the Dark Ages. It was a time of chaos, confusion, and conflict, and we are going to talk about all of that as we cover the top 10 terrifying secrets from the Dark Age of ancient Egypt. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the downfall. To start this list off, let's talk about one of the things that happened just before the transition into the first intermediate period of ancient Egypt. It is important to note some of the causes of the fall of the Old Kingdom, which is what brought forth this period of chaos and turmoil. One reason that is often cited is the extremely long reign of Pepe II, who was the last pharaoh of the 6th dynasty. His reign began while he was a child, and it is believed that he lived to possibly into his 90s, which, first of all, that's incredible. Imagine that guy with modern medicine and plumbing. I'm just saying. But, of course, while that's wild to see that long of a reign, especially back in those times, his lengthy life proved to cause some issues for succession because the guy outlived all of his heirs. Because of this sort of disorganization, it led to the regime of the Old Kingdom kind of being disintegrated. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Nile. The overflowing of the Nile was a very important time for ancient Egyptians. It is a super important cycle for them that was actually celebrated annually for 2 weeks. In the intermediate period, it is thought that the overflowing of the Nile, which really was necessary to their way of life, was lessened, or it may have potentially been non-existent for a period due to a drier climate, which is said to have potentially led ancient Egypt and its citizens into a terrible famine. The drier climate and the lack of the Nile inundation would have resulted in lower crop yields, which would have a significant impact on those living in the area at the time. In our number 8 spot today, we have disorganization. Like I kind of mentioned in the first point, part of the reason this intermediate period is often referred to as the Dark Ages is due to the lack of organization within the kingdom. Manetho, who is a historian and priest from the Ptolemaic era, would describe 70 kings who ruled in 70 days. This is likely a bit sarcastic and an exaggeration, but it's meant to show how chaotic things were at the time in terms of leadership. This period of time can sometimes be overlooked in terms of leadership because there is very little known about who was actually leading during this time. It is possible that the 7th dynasty may have been more of an oligarchy, which would have likely been composed of officials of the 6th dynasty. There unfortunately is very little in terms of both textual as well as architectural evidence that survived this period, so much of what really went on remains a secret. In our number 7 spot today, we have artifacts. During the time of the 7th and 8th dynasty, while it is true that we have little to go on, there have been a few interesting artifacts found that are believed to belong to this time period. There have been scarabs that have been found that are believed to have belonged to Neferker II of the 7th dynasty. There was also a green jasper cylinder that is believed to have come from the 8th dynasty. There was even a small pyramid that was constructed by King Ebi of the 8th dynasty that has been identified at Saqqara. While we have found these things, there are some rulers from this time whose positions remain unknown to this day. It is entirely possible that we may never know where some of these rulers lie. In our number 6 spot today, we have literature. While this entire period of time is incredibly interesting, one super cool thing is that the emergence of what is considered literature by our more modern standards seems to have occurred during this period of time. This led to the birth of new literary prowess in the Middle Kingdom, the age that came after this period. There is one specific piece that is very important historically, and that is the Ipuwer Papyrus. Although this piece of literature is not dated to this period, it is widely believed that it is likely referring to this intermediate period, and it records the decline in both international relations as well as just the general impoverishment that was seen in ancient Egypt at the time. In our number 5 spot today, we have nomarchs. Another problem that really contributed to the fall of the Old Kingdom and the introduction into this more difficult period of time was the rise in power of provincial nomarchs. A nomarch was a provincial governor in ancient Egypt. Since the country was divided into 42 different provinces, which were called nomes, there would be a government official that was responsible for each one. Nearing the beginning of the first intermediate period, the position of nomarch had become a hereditary one, which of course meant that one family was likely to hold the position and the power for quite some time. This of course meant that these families, with every year, would only get more powerful and more influential within their nome, which left them becoming more independent from their overall ruler. These nomarchs were beginning to have their own tombs built, and they began and their own armies, and of course, this went on to create conflict with those surrounding them. This not only created tensions, but it created warfare. In our number 4 spot today, we have division. Once things kind of settled from the chaos of the fall of the Old Kingdom and the bizarrities of the 7th and 8th dynasties, it was realized that Egypt was now kind of divided when it came to ruling, as there were 2 competing power bases. One of those bases was at Heracleopolis, which was located in Lower Egypt, and the other was at Thebes in Upper Egypt. Those in Lower Egypt had their rule for approximately 94 years, and their kings comprised the 9th and 10th dynasties, each with 19 rulers. The founder of the 9th dynasty, Kheti I, is often described as quite an evil and violent ruler who caused a lot of harm to those living in Egypt at the time. It is said that he was, quote, seized with madness, which I'm not entirely sure what that means, but it is likely hinting towards some sort of mental health issue. In the end, it is said that he met his demise at the hands of a crocodile, which, I mean, leaves me with a lot of questions. In our number 3 spot today, we have the buffer zone. Within the Heracleopolitan kingdom, there was a powerful and wealthy province of Siut, or Asiut, which really rose to prominence during this otherwise difficult time. A new line of nomarchs began to rise out of this area, and they maintained quite a close relationship with the kings of Lower Egypt. We were able to discover this through what was inscribed on their tombs. These inscriptions provided a look into what the political situations were like during their reigns, and it describes this line of nomarchs as digging canals, reducing taxation, reaping rich harvests, raising cattle herds, and maintaining an army and fleet. Again, we are talking about a time that is referred to as the Dark Ages, so this sort of success was a big deal. Despite this thriving political situation, the Siut province acted as a sort of buffer zone between the dueling Upper and Lower Egypt, which means that it also bore a lot of the brunt of the attacks that were coming down to Lower Egypt from Thebes. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Upper Egypt rulers. We spoke briefly about those who were ruling Lower Egypt at the time, so what about Upper Egypt? Well, the Theban kings are said to have been descendants of Intef, who is the nomarch of Thebes, often referred to as the keeper of the door to the south. Intef is often credited with organizing Upper Egypt into the independent ruling body from the south that it went on to become, but despite this, it doesn't appear as though he ever tried to claim the title of king himself. Intef II began the attack of northern Egypt, and his successor Intef III completed that attack, which then left him to begin the move into Middle Egypt and the attack on Lower Egypt. The first 3 kings of the 11th dynasty, all named Intef, would also become the last 3 kings of the first intermediate period. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Middle Kingdom. With all of the political chaos that was going on and with the competition for power, this resulted in a lot of violence. Prior to the military conflict, it is said that temples were pillaged, artwork was vandalized, and statues of different kings were destroyed. After the reign of the Intefs, they were succeeded by a line of kings who were called Mentuhotep. The second in this line is the ruler who would go on to eventually defeat the kings and rulers of Lower Egypt, those in the Heracleopolitan kingdom. This is important because it marked a new shift in ancient Egypt. This defeat marked the unification